Doubles and coffee. Well, watching the end of Parliament yesterday, where the state of emergency was extended unanimously, 39-0. At the end, the Speaker of the House invited members to give greetings on Emancipation Day, from the government side, from the opposition, and then the Speaker himself. Well, I could not believe that Penelope Beckles chose out of her bench, which is totally African descent, she chose Marvin Gonzalez, a man who just made the most racist, disgusting, asinine statement in a public press conference, talking about when he see Trinbagonians on boards, he see Bangladesh and Delhi. Penelope Beckles stayed silent. She said nothing. She did not condemn the statement. She did not distance herself nor her party from the statement. And in fact, Penelope Beckles sat there and rewarded the racist, divisive statement of Marvin Gonzalez and asked him to bring greetings on behalf of the PNM as we celebrate this week, Emancipation Day. Even Keith Christopher Rowley, the worst Prime Minister in the history of Trinidad and Tobago, the worst leader of the PNM, the biggest Oreo, the most disgusting human being to ever hold power, the man whose policies were deleterious to all people, not only African and Indo people, but all Trinbagonians, the man who took all away from the people to give himself and his ministers and his financiers. Even Rowley knew that what Marvin Gonzalez said was asinine. He said it was inelegant. He even said he lied on him in cabinet. But Penelope Beckles, like a little amoeba with no spine, sat there and let Marvin Gonzalez. And then on top of that, Marvin Gonzalez got up while we celebrated Emancipation Day and tried to link the People's National Movement to the upward and onward progress of African people in this country. Marvin Gonzalez, you need to read a book. You need to read a PNM history. PNM by itself, other than colonialism, is the biggest stain and the yoke around the neck of African people in Trinidad and Tobago since 1956 coming forward. Understand that it was 1970 Black Power Revolution was against the PNM, was against Dr. Williams, was against the leadership that had existed for some 14 unfettered years at that point. And black people couldn't get a fair shake. They couldn't get jobs. They couldn't get jobs in banks. They couldn't get elite positions under this PNM government. And Marvin Gonzalez gets up to try to link PNM to the upward mobility of African people. I tell you that the PNM was as bad, if not worse, than colonialism. Let me give you a few examples. When Dr. Williams took over in 1956, and then we gained independence in 1962, and the PNM was unfettered in government, had powers, controlled the budget, could implement policy, choose the cabinet, had the majority in parliament. Did Dr. Williams introduce African history in our schools? Did he legalize and legitimize African religion? Orisha, Shouter Baptist? Or did he leave it illegal? Was there African history in schools? What about African culture? What about the African art, an African art form, an African drumming? Did it become a national staple since the PNM was this bastion of African integrity, enhancement, and upliftment? No. Dr. Williams left African people lost in the wilderness, and he knew what he was doing because he was the foremost scholar on the transatlantic slave trade. He knew how it divided communities and families. He knew that religious belief and self-esteem would be impacted as people were plundered, grabbed, raped, pulled out, extricated from their homeland, from their villages, from their culture, from their art, from their history. Dr. Williams chose not to replace that. While Dr. Williams was there after taking over from colonials, you know who the scholars were? I'll start to sweat because you see this thing, this race thing for this Douglas here, is really a passionate thing. Being a half African Tobagonian and a half East Indian mother from Malaysia. Do you know when the PNM took control after we gained independence, you know who the scholars were in the main? 90% of the scholars were young black African boys. Yes, there wasn't gender equity back then. Queen's Royal College, QRC, was the #1 school. My father was part of that. The Africans, if there were 12 exhibition scholarships or 20, 18 or 19, would be African youth, African male, African boys at the highest levels of academia. The doctors, the lawyers were coming out. 80-90% African people. The PNM took control. They took control of the resources from 1956 and unfettered to 1986. And somewhere around 1978 to 1982, the formerly illiterate East Indian community, they were basically functionally illiterate. They had come on the Fatal Razak, they had come as indentured servants from the lowest caste of India. They could hardly read and write. But yet these people now, realizing that political power was not ever going to come their way because of the PNM juggernaut, because of the rigged system, the Mahasabha, the Hindu communities, the Muslim communities, Ashtra, different groups started to say, listen, we must take care of ourselves. We must educate our children. We must make schools and teach them because education is the way out. They took Dr. Williams' advice, and the PNM said that they were in schools in Donkey Cart on the corner and all kind of things, in old shed, cow shed. They denigrated them, the recalcitrant minority. And by the late 90s, when you start to look, and let me talk about when I really started to look, because I went back also, but when I got onto the radio in 2004, I started to really analyze the data from SEA, from legal, law school, Hugh Wooden graduation, med school, and so on. And in SEA, from 2004 up to the present time, if you see a top 100 or a top 200, you would see 65 to 72% East Indian names. You will see 18 to 21% African-based names, and then the others mix up Dogra, Chinese, Syrian, white, mix up Trinbagonian. And that has continued unfettered for 21 years. When you see Cape and CSEC, or before when it was O-levels and A-levels, when you see the president's medals, go and check for yourself. The East Indian community started to advance across the board in education because their parents, their religion, their people, their communities put the focus. The PNM was in charge, and they took black African people from the tops, from the heights of academia, down to also ran. That is the PNM. The PNM created after creating and holding on to the budget for decades. They created no black billionaires. But you had billionaires that people now describing as 1%. And this Marvin Gonzalez gets up and talks about PNM as though it is something good for black people. It was Bastio Pandey who recognized Shouta Baptist Day, the East Indian Prime Minister of the UNC. It was Bastio Pandey who allowed Stokely Carmichael. Do you know who Stokely Carmichael? Later changed his name to Kwame Ture. Do you know who he is? He was a black leader and Black Panther who fought for black people in America against Jim Crow and the civil rights movement. He fought alongside and taught the teachings of Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, and so on. You know what the PNM did to Stokely Carmichael, a born Trinbagonian? He left here at the age of 11. PNM banned Stokely Carmichael from ever returning to the land of his birth. This bastion of Africanism, this bastion of PNM, black man thing that Marvin Gonzalez talked yesterday, they banned Stokely Carmichael. He could not come back because the PNM did not agree with the sort of teachings, beliefs, and pride and self-esteem of Stokely Carmichael, of civil rights movement. The PNM wanted to oppress black people. The PNM is the one who keep and made black people dependent on the government, and they must say, instead of preaching and chanting and shouting their Baptist religion and their Orisha religion and the chants to the God Almighty who they worship, they had to shout, "Great is the PNM, great is the PNM, and it shall prevail," while black people went dumb. The PNM in all iterations, even in the last one, cut funding to everything that helped black people, including football. I could go on and on. But the PNM has been a yoke around the neck of black people. Black people were doing better without the PNM. Black people's skill, their brilliance, their creativity, their intensity, their passion, their discipline was fighting through colonialism and bringing success. The PNM came and oppressed and suppressed black people. The only black conglomerate ever come up, CL Financial, was bolstered and boosted by UNC Indian philosophy and Indian government and Indian encouragement. You know what the PNM did? Shattered it, took it, abused it, and up to now, they cannot get back the company and the assets. The one black man who celebrated and came out of the oppression of the PNM to be creative and hit the world with business and profit and bubble billions. The PNM didn't like that. They had to take it. They had to oppress it. They had to mash it up and share it with those who they love. Call the 1%, whatever color, whatever mix, whatever you call that. So don't get up on Emancipation Day and take this basket from this PNM, putting on a dashiki and thing and pretending. Look at the policies of the PNM. Black people, African people have suffered. The communities held by PNM, the strongholds of the PNM have the highest unemployment rates, the lowest educational rates, the lowest business rates, the lowest entrepreneur rates, the highest crime rates, the worst infrastructure. That is PNM. So Marvin Gonzalez, your black jacket, white jacket, hypocrite, hush your mouth, and to Penny Beckers, you are no shame. What you leading? What you really leading, lady? To the West of Trinidad and Tobago, celebrate Emancipation Day. Yes, your boy sweating, so what? The African and the Indian in me proud to be free, to be intelligent, to be creative, and glad that Trinidad and Tobago could go forward without the PNM. Bless.